Hey Wargamers, welcome back to the channel, Death from Above Wargaming. I'm Aaron, and I'm back with more Merc's Kickstarter hardware for our review. This is the Hermes II, the HER-5Sr. All right, so this is a field refit of the Hermes, or the Hermes II, to be specific. And it does some neat things to it. Basically, let's talk about the Hermes II. It's a 40-ton Inner Sphere medium mech. It's got a battle value of 1242. It seems a little high for a 40-tonner, but let's take a closer look. So it was produced in 3074. Again, this one, it says it was like a field refit kit. Moves pretty well. 6'9", does not jump, 10 double heat sinks, standard fusion engine, which I love. It does have an XL gyro. I don't hate those. I think that's reasonable. Cockpit standard, endosteel structure, and it's got 7.5 tons of standard armor. It's 120 pips for 87.6% overall coverage, which is reliable. It's respectable, and I do really love the armor distribution. I don't mind when things are a little light on the legs in favor of protecting things that are a little more important, like the arms where all your weapons are, and your torsos, and of course your head. Let's talk about gear. So this thing does have a Guardian ECM suite on it, which is very, very cool. It has a flamer, a medium pulse laser, which I don't love. I don't love any Inner Sphere pulse weapons. I would rather just put two standard lasers on, or one standard laser and maybe more armor, or an ER and another double heatsink. I'm not sure. Anything but the medium pulse. I don't love it. And then it's got a heavy PPC, which is absolutely phenomenal. This thing is it's a game changer, I think, for PPC, Inner Sphere PPC technology. I love that heavy PPC. But fun fact about the Hermes. So if you don't know about Sarna.net, you should definitely check it out. It is like the best BattleTech wiki, maybe the only BattleTech wiki, but it's definitely the only one I look at. It's tremendous. So I was reading about the Hermes II, just to learn a little brush up before I did this Battlytics. And my favorite part was it talks about how the Hermes was used in the lore. And it says, primarily the Hermes operates alone, because missions where light mechs are too weak and heavy mechs are too clumsy, like send in the Hermes. But really what the Hermes did was just run in, like blow stuff up, and then light everything on fire and run away. That was like its signature move. And if it wasn't doing that, it was basically the bait in a larger lance, where it would basically lure, like everybody'd be like, hey, that's the dude that lit everything on fire, get him. And then like its buddies would jump out of the bushes with, it's like King Crab would come out of the bushes with autocannons or whatever. So very funny. So if you're a Hermes pilot, you're crazy, is essentially. You're like a pyromaniac and you're crazy. They're the people that pilot Hermes. So if your best friend's like, dude, I would love to pilot a Hermes, just, be a little careful around that person. That's all I'm saying. But anyway, let's dig into the Battlytics. Let's look at the numbers. It's offensive, defensive. We'll get into all of it. So guys, stick around. The Hermes II. It's coming right up. All right, let's kick it off with the offensive benchmark. So, ironically, the Hermes really can't overheat. It can build up a very, very tiny amount of heat once that medium pulse laser comes into play. But other than that, for most of its life, you're really not at risk for building up very much heat. So actually it's when the flamer and the medium pulse come into play. So if you fire one or the other, you're fine, but it's when it's both, it's when apparently it gets a little toasty in the Hermes. But overall, it's not bad. It does 108 points of baseline damage, which is really respectable in my opinion for a 40-ton mech. You can guess where most of that damage is coming from. It's the heavy PPC. The thing is phenomenal. So let's talk about the heavy PPC for a minute. It does clan PPC levels of damage, so that's 15. It does build up 15 points of heat, which stinks, but that's okay because the Hermes doesn't really care. Range on this thing, it's 6, 12, 18, so it's the same as a standard PPC, if I'm not mistaken, but it's doing 5 more points of damage, which is absolute. It's huge. Coming out of a 40-ton mech, it's like a Gauss rifle slug. It's a lot of damage. It's a lot of damage. So let's look at the lethality index. So damage per hit, obviously through the roof because the heavy PPC is pulling that damage way up. Critical hits are down because it's typically only firing one weapon until that medium pulse comes into range. But honestly, like how often is that happening? I don't even know. Again, with the with the heavy PPC, I would have put on ER medium lasers instead of the medium pulse. Like the sort of that. I like that they kept the flamer for the lore perspective, but the medium pulse makes no sense to me. Maybe they were trying to pair another weapon with the flamer to complement it at shorter ranges, but I don't get it. I would have rather had the ER medium, I think. But maybe the heat sinks would be saturated at that point with, again, 15 heat coming out of the PPC. I mean, no, but you dissipate 20, so it would be fine. You build up a little bit of heat, but I don't know. What do you think? Leave it in the comments. So time to kill on the Javelin was actually above average, so 10.93. Average, the number that we like to see is about 10. Anything over that, you're on the wrong side of the average. Most of the kills were just eating through the CT. And I think the reason the time to kill is so high is because it really only has one weapon to shoot. So your probability of hitting the same location over and over is not very good, right? So when I see things like that, I always use the expression bore holes. Like this is like a hole borer. Like this is the kind of light mech that you bring or medium mech that you bring in a lance, right? In a lighter lance overall, where you just want to blast holes in things. And then, maybe a Javelin actually is a great complement to this, or a Trebuchet or something along those lines that has a lot of critical opportunities and can spray a lot of, hit a lot of different locations. And then you can knock that limb off that you just hit, or actually get through into the engine on the torso or whatever it might be. So anyway, we'll talk more about that stuff when we get into the rolls, I think. But just wanted to say that now as it was on the top of my brain. But anyway, let's move on to the defensive side and see how tough the Hermes is. All right, so what does it say here? Armor diagnostic, again, looks really good to me. The yellow lines on this chart, if you're unfamiliar, represent average distribution. So if I took that total 86% coverage or whatever it was, and I spread the armor evenly, the yellow line is kind of where I would expect the armor levels to be. The green is the actual. So you can see arms, torso, rear, it's over that sort of target, and that's because it's borrowing from the legs. But the legs aren't so severely under armored that I think I would be concerned. Looking at the actual numbers, you got 14 pips on the legs for a 40-ton mech. That's pretty good. So happy with that overall. Now, in terms of the mobility analysis, so this thing is 8.5%. So 8.5% of the time. So again, that's like 8.5 shots out of 100. This thing is seeing a leg actuator, hip frozen, something along those lines, damaged. It's really not bad. It's actually very, very good. Over the course of the 12-turn simulations, it maintained an average target mod of 2.82, and its maximum is 3, right? Because it can run 9. So that's very good in my opinion. What's interesting is like the Hermes is fast, like 6.9 is fast, but a 711, right, type like a Jenner type speed mech where you can get into that next TMM threshold, right? You can go to +4. That's like huge. And so it's kind of interesting to me that this thing, and I guess because it's a field refit, they didn't change out the engine, I'm not sure, but it's interesting to me that it didn't end up with mask or something goofy to make this thing even faster, considering, like Hermes, like it's its namesake, right? Speed. Again, digressing, just top of mind. But anyway, overall survivability, 61.9%. It's really good for a 40-ton mech. I mean, it's not that big. When we're talking about bigger mechs getting in the 70s and 80s, that's good for that size. But for 35, 40 tons, 61.9 is respectable. Now, that doesn't mean that you want to run this thing up the gut and it's going to soak fire. I mean, it will die. But you'll notice that most of the deaths are CT deaths. Like they're just eating through the CT. Like your gyro is at a higher risk of getting damaged because that XL gyro does take up 2 additional slots. But again, they're going to have to eat through all your CT armor. and take out that gyro or take out that engine or something along those lines, or just knock out all your structure, which in this case is what's happening. Engine deaths only account for 0.7% of the overall deaths. So overall, my assessment so far is I'm pretty happy with the Hermes. I like what it's doing, but again, I keep eyeballing that battle value 1242, and I think about things like the Wolfhound, and I think that's like in the 900s or so. So that's like a significant difference. Interested to see the efficiency. So why don't we look at that next? All right, so here we are. So again, survival rate 61.9%. So that's again pretty respectable. That damage loss, or the drift between the optimized damage and the effective damage, or the damage that takes into account the survivability, the drift there is 14.6%. So that's a little higher than we'd like to see. And again, to me, it was a surprising number, but I see that it's doing a lot of damage at closer range because the heavy PPC is hitting more, right? Because you're in short range, and then also that medium pulse comes into play. But when you get that close, the mech's damaged, it's at risk. It's even, more at risk because you're closer. So again, this ties back. I'm not going to say I'm the smartest mech designer in the world, but I would strip that pulse laser off. I would put on an ER medium and keep the thing at range. You'll do a lot better. But efficiency, 5.38. Is it good? Is it bad? I'd say that's good. All right. So I am looking at the Wolfhound 2 on Battlytics.com. We have the analysis up there just to give you an idea of where the Wolfhound 2 is. So that's 1,061 battle value, all right, for the Wolfhound 2. The baseline damage on the Wolfhound 2 is 97.3 versus 108 for the Hermes. Optimized is 104 versus 109 for the Hermes. And effective, though, is, where are we at for effective? I don't know. I don't have that here. But what I do have is efficiency, and that's 5.45. I don't know where that other number went, but we don't need it. What we know is the Wolfhound is basically in the same efficiency as the Hermes 2. And again, the Hermes 2, you're paying for that ECM. I mentioned this, I think, on one of the prior mechs that I think it was the Gladiator, right, that had the C3 and the ECM. Battlytics really doesn't take that into account. It does drive up the battle value. So really, I think this thing is on par with a Wolfhound, which for me is kind of like a benchmark mech for lights in terms of effective lights that I like to use frequently. So when I see this efficiency rating of 5.38, I think that's pretty darn good for a 40-ton mech, which is surprising. Again, I do think there's opportunities to improve this mech. We'll talk about that in a minute again. But gunnery sensitivity, 0.5. You're not going to see, it's not bad. You will see some improvements. This is the kind of mech I would absolutely play at a gunnery 3 or gunnery 2. If you want to get sassy, play it a little bit lower, but keep it at range. Do not close with the thing at all. Just use it as a sniper in that context. But I would keep it at probably gunnery 3 for the cost. Gunnery 3 is going to run you about $14.90 for like a 3.5. If you want to go down lower, obviously that battle value would go up. But overall, not disappointed with this efficiency rating. Let's talk about threat and rolls. All right, so here it is. I picked 3 rolls here, my top 3 rolls for the Hermes 2. Tell me if you agree. The first one is cavalry. So, over and over again tonight, I was like, don't close with this mech. But again, that is kind of what it's designed for with the medium pulse and the flamer. If you want to get those in play, this is a good mech to do it. It's, again, it's fast. It can get in people's faces. It does have decent survivability for its size, right? Its class. It's not going to go toe-to-toe with like a Gladiator or a Bushwhacker or a Wolverine, but it can go toe-to-toe with other 40-ton Clints, assassins, things along those lines, assuming it can catch the assassin, right? It'll certainly, smother those mechs, I think. So pretty good in that regard. The other one I had was second line. So just keep the thing, floating around in your backfield. Use that heavy PPC to full effect. Just hold the trigger down on it. If you put a good skilled pilot in there, you will land a lot of hits. It can do a lot of great damage with that. And then once things are damaged enough, then you kind of close in and clean up the trash. You can use that pulse laser, maybe get that flamer in play. I just find, again, digression, I find the small lasers and the flamers, like the 3 hex stuff, it's like so hard to get it in range, unless unless you and your opponent play that style where everybody's kind of in a conga line punching each other, which is also fun. But if you're really trying to keep your range and keep your things alive, if you're playing in like a persistent campaign or something along those lines, the flamer's almost useless other than doing what it said on Sarna, which is like light woods hexes on fire, which does have tactical advantages for sure if you're playing with the smoke rules and things like that. All right, so the last role I had was Skirmisher. Again, it's very similar to what we talked about before, like using this thing almost as a sniper, very low gunnery, keep it at range, just hold the throttle down to full, run it around at 90 kilometers an hour, and just shoot stuff. 15 points of damage is nothing to scoff at. I would do that if this were the small guy in a big lance, where you have bigger mediums and heavies and things along those lines. And this guy's just chilling, running around, causing havoc. You might even get some mechs to look your way and try to shoot. If you're annoying enough, they might see that heavy PPC, which again it's like a Gauss rifle. It's slightly worse range, but it's still powerful. No one's going to turn a blind eye to 15 points of damage. But if you can keep this thing's TMM up, the target mod up to +3, I think it'll do very, very well in that sort of context. Not much to say otherwise. One interesting thing, I guess, that jumps out at me is the obviously the zero heat ACD you see in the chart. It drops off once the flamer comes in range, because it starts to actually build up heat there. But the peak Alpha Strike, 23 points of damage at 3 inches. That's when all the guns are in play. I can't stress it enough. Like, if you allow field refits, get the damn pulse laser off. It makes no sense to me. I'd have to look at the critical space. I'll look now. There's more than enough critical space to mount another heatsink. Like, throw an ER medium and another heatsink, another double heatsink on. There's lots of different things I think you could do. I mean, the flamer's kind of fun, from a fluff perspective. But if you really want to go to town, like, I dump the flamer too. And maybe put 2 ER mediums on there, and another heatsink. I think that's kind of what I would do. But interested to know what you would do. Leave it in the comments. What do you think about the Hermes 5SR? You love it, you hate it. Are there other Hermes II variants that you typically play? And of course, my favorite comments are always when you guys tell me stories about a game you remember when you were either playing a Hermes II or playing against it. These like memorable moments. Some great stuff there. So please post those as well. While you're at it, subscribe and leave a like. And of course, if you want to help out the channel more, head on over to Patreon. It's as little as $1 a month. And there are some other tiers as well that unlock additional benefits. But speaking of that, also Aries Games and Minis. Guys, Aries is phenomenal. So Aries is a big supporter of the channel. Thanks to Aries Games and Minis, all of our videos in 2024 have had no ads in the middle of the video, right? So you can watch our battle report. You watch, I think there's like 1 or 2 ads in the beginning, and you watch the whole thing all the way to the end, and there's no ads, and that's because of Aries Games and Minis. So show Derek some love. Buy some things that you love. Do it all at once. Lots of love flying around. The minis, the books, the dice, the games. There's terrain, there's the Fighting Piranha decals, the Felder cases, pretty much everything you need, paints and paintbrushes, literally everything you need to fuel your BattleTech hobby at Aries Games and Minis, so check that out. But that's it. I'm done marketing. Guys, let me know what you think about the Hermes II. Very cool design. I'm very excited about the new miniature. And honestly, I really like this new design, this particular refit, I should say. So might try this one out on the tabletop at some point. But that said, I'm all done. So guys, thank you so much for watching. And of course, stay tuned. Always great stuff coming from Death from Above Wargaming. Have a good day.